Summary conjuncts, all in all, thus, in conclusion, in sum, to sum up, to conclude. Enumeration conjuncts, in the first place or in the second place, first of all, to begin with, etc. Finally, should be included there too. Comparison conjuncts, on the one hand, on the other, for one thing, for another. We're going to have a look at some of the characteristics of conjuncts. First of all, conjuncts constitute lexical items, as has already been expressed. They're not grammatical constructions, but lexical items. They are textual linkers. They helped to link portions of text, as opposed to other connectors that only link structural elements, such as prepositions and conjunctions. Yes, it is worth noting that a preposition is also a linker, but it only links phrases. A conjunction, on the other hand, is a linker that connects clause. A typical case is although. Although, for example, although it was raining, we went to the movies, okay? Or we went out. Although it was raining, we went out. Although links only two clauses, and the linking does not go beyond those two clauses. That's why we call it a sentence connector or a conjunction. Going back to conjuncts, such as however, we have to add that most of them tend to occur in sentence initial position, frequently, although not always, followed by a comma. We're not going to go into punctuation matters here, because that's a fairly complex issue, since, as many of you probably know, English punctuation, particularly regarding the comma, is a debatable issue, and it's considered to be quite a free kind of issue. Mid-position is used for emphatic purposes sometimes, as, for example, when you say, this, however, is unacceptable, instead of saying, however, this is unacceptable. If you say, this, however, is unacceptable, that implies that the movement of a conjunct towards, let's say, a position after the subject, it has to do with the idea of emphasizing that same subject. For example, you say, this, however, is unacceptable, and then the this is emphasized. Final position is rare, although it is structurally required by some expressions. For example, to and though. Yes, I want to do that. To goes at the end. We shouldn't have done that, though. Though can also go at the end. Well, though is more variable, it can adopt various positions, but it frequently appears in final position. Although conjuncts of the same meaning tend to occur in the same paragraph, for example, in one paragraph you would find, for example, conjuncts of comparison and contrast only, and although this is common and it tends to occur particularly in carefully written paragraphs, it is more common for conjuncts of different meanings and types to co-occur in a given text. You will find, for example, a text with contrast conjuncts, with exemplification conjuncts, with addition conjuncts, and so on. And that is fairly common, and also you see part of authentic texts in English. Finally, conjuncts are not just a feature to be found in formal writing, such as academic prose. There are, in fact, as observed in the Longman Grammar of Spoken and Written English, Biber et al. 1999, quite frequent in conversation too. Therefore, I think they have to be incorporated to any kind of English language course. You cannot avoid them. In this part of the class, we're going to have a look at some aspects that should be taken into account when teaching conjuncts. As explained above, you see, or before, conjuncts should be treated as lexical items rather than as grammatical structures. Students should learn them as formulaic items that cannot be broken down into constituents. For example, the conjunct "on the other hand" can be paired with the word "however," so that students recall it as one word. Or if you wish, you can also give them a Spanish translation that consists of only one word. Always make the meaning of the relationship explicit. I don't think you can learn to use conjuncts if the meaning relationships between portions of text are not made clear. Students should be trained to read well, that is to say, to relate the ideas or the sequence of ideas that come before and after the conjunct, to see how those ideas are linked and thus determine the function of that conjunct. You should use them, the conjuncts, in actual and hopefully also authentic texts, rather than in isolated sentences. It is very common to find exercises of conjuncts along with other conjunctions in very simple sentences. I know that this has often a pedagogical purpose in mind of simplifying things for students. However, this is quite remote from reality. That's why I think you should always find room to put conjuncts in authentic contexts. Otherwise, you will run the risk that your students will simply not learn them. Now, I'm going to propose a series of activities in which conjuncts can be incorporated into the classroom. We're going to have a look at a first activity. And this is, I think, a vital activity that should precede probably all other activities. As you can see in the slide, the instructions read in the following way. Relate the following expressions in column A with their corresponding meanings in column B. We have A, the conjuncts similarly, nevertheless, on the other hand, for instance, and to illustrate. In column B, scrambled of course, we've got the meanings: contrast, example, addition, clarification, and concession. You can give your students about 3 to 5 minutes to do this activity. We're going to do it together now, and we're going to provide the answers. Well, similarly is addition. Nevertheless, concession. On the other hand, contrast. For instance, example, and to illustrate, clarification. This is a very useful activity, but of course you should never leave it like that. You have to also find other ways to put conjuncts into practice. Activity 2 is more of a practical nature, or let's say of a contextual nature, if you want. However, it is still a simple activity because all the expressions that you'll find in the text that appears on the slide are related to only one meaning. With texts, what I normally do is I ask my students to read them out loud, maybe also for a chance to correct pronunciation, to improve pronunciation, and to check whether they understand all the words. If you do not want to distract your students with those kinds of activities, you could simply give them, for example, the meanings in kind of footnote or on a checklist, so as to make sure that they understand the text. We're going to read the text together, I'm going to read for you, but ideally your students should read.